its predecessor, but instead provide transparency and honesty about the evidence that caused so much suffering. Having witnessed the trauma inflicted upon the girl I once was, I truly believed that leaders like Trump and Musk aimed to, quote, drain the swamp, end quote. However, my faith is waning. I hope they prove me wrong and that justice will finally be served for the hundreds of victims, including myself, who continue to suffer from the PTSD inflicted by those we are told to trust. Thank you for being a truth seeker and for your unwavering fight for justice. Together, may we strive for a government that truly serves the people and upholds the principles of freedom for all. God bless you, Tara, and God bless America. Warm regards, Virginia Roberts.
And what an amazing goal that we would hope to achieve, and to carry that torch forward and keep going after these bastards.
Yeah, but I do not feel we're going to see a phase two. I believe we were led down a primrose path. In fact, before every election, every presidential candidate, every political candidate does make false promises. We have all been witness to that. And sadly, Virginia's fight, I'm glad that she stood up to them, and there is a statement. It's on her X. Everyone can find it. She's disappointed with this administration. She did start working for Donald Trump, so she knows him. That is where she was procured by Ghislaine Maxwell. And, she went back and forth. Trust Trump, not trust Trump. Trump becomes president. In the end, she saw his true colors.
Yeah, it's just musical chairs with these politicians. So,
Yes.
Melissa, if you've got questions for the panel chat, put them in the chat. Melissa's asking if there's any specific evidence that we are aware of that has been relied on to classify the death as her unaliving herself. Does
So
anyone have any knowledge of that?
I've read about 12 newspaper articles, and other than saying that they found her, in and then to say that there was, quote, no suspicion, but no further comments of where she was found. Was it in the bedroom? Was it in the living room? Was it in the kitchen? Was it in the bathroom? The manner of unalivement has not been exposed, not by her family. I expect that within the next day or so, because of her prominence in the biggest story of our collective lifetimes. I believe more information will come out. Um, I think we deserve it to know what happened to Virginia.
Well,
Do we
it
know
is
who
rather
got-
is it rather like, with the death of Gene Hackman and his wife, it will take time for this to be discovered. So I think speculation about this at this stage is probably not appropriate, because we don't know what happened or how, or what method of how this terrible death occurred. But yes, there will be lots of speculation, and there'll be lots of conspiracy theories on the internet, as always there are with any matter. And the things they said about Gene Hackman were wild at the beginning, and then obviously it emerged a pattern of what actually happened. And we have to wait for an inquest, and I think a period of calm, and let this family grieve in peace. I think that's the best thing to do at this time.
But one thing for sure is that the trajectory survivors are put on often ends in unalivement, and that you can trace that back as a root cause, the trauma, and then what happens later on in life. Wouldn't you say so, Kirby?
I think
Yeah,
this is
I
very
would agree.
different from the Gene Hackman situation. The Gene Hackman situation, I believe, will always remain somewhat mysterious. Although there's enough to, I think, say, okay, certain things seem okay. In Virginia's case, it's a little bit more clear cut. We saw the trajectory in real time when she was she was in the accident, and all the backlash. We saw that in real time. We knew that she was going through emotional, like, the emotional roller coaster that she had to be feeling on a day-to-day basis, and then the paparazzi basically taking a photograph of her. And Virginia, we saw that photograph. She stuck out her middle finger. It's like, enough. I would have done the same thing, frankly. There's, when you are trying to recover both mentally and physical, and even a hospital stay that's, that didn't have the kind of bruising that we saw of her, and we only saw her face. God knows the bruising in her entire body that would have been visible, right? Because I'm sure she had bruising in the rest of her body that we did not see. But for the paparazzi only then to hound her after they attempted, I think a strong attempt was made to discredit her during that period where she most needed everyone's support. And mainstream media is as much responsible for the demise, finally, of this most amazing creature as, let's say, somebody like Victoria Harvey, who she can backpedal all she wants. She is equally responsible, and the trolls out there. I hope they understand that bullying can lead someone to do something that they would never ordinarily do. And that finally it was the bullying at a time that she was at her weakest emotionally that brings us here today to this tragic and horrific end. The manner of death, I believe, will be shared with the public because there will be an autopsy. It will be released to the public because for the media, these are clicks for them. So they will cover that for sure. We'll know in a few days what's going to happen.
We have a similar situation, was the death of Caroline Flack in England, and the backlash she experienced, and the manner in which she died, and we don't seem to learn lessons from this and control the way that people are treated. And I think that is something that maybe it's time that perhaps this may be a moment, and there might be some kind of positive outcoming of how people are treated in the media in these kind of situations. And that might be one good thing that could come out of this if people start to listen and understand that if you drive people to the point of that, then this kind of thing happens. And that's what we should learn from this awful tragedy.
Agreed.
Do we know who she was living with, Kirby, and how this would have been called in? Who would have found her?
Well, she did have a caretaker in the house, that 71-year-old woman who was driving the car. I don't have her name at my fingertips, but that woman lived on the property, and that's where Virginia was living. Frankly, she didn't own that second property. She rented that second property, and she rented that to go when she and Robbie broke up. But that woman would have been the person who found her.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense then, because the media's saying that it was called in by somebody. So
yeah, by the 71-year-old woman who was driving the car, and who the bus driver just had a conversation with after the accident.
Have you checked on any of the other survivors, such as Maria, the Farmer sisters?
It's funny because I'm more I'm talking more with someone else, with Rose Juliet Bryant, who is also terrified that she is going to be unalived. And I think I mentioned this the last time you and I spoke about Virginia. In Juliet Bryant's case, she's had people insert themselves into her life, beat her up, and she has had mysterious and unusual happenings. She has seen unusual trucks parked in front of her home. She is afraid to leave her house. She has an 8-year-old, so I know that she told me that all the girls went silent on her, meaning Maria was no longer responding to her emails or trying to communicate for a while. Virginia had also stopped communicating for a while. she was, she and I, we were talking like we're talking now, we got it because she lives in another country. And she told me all these girls, we were so close. We were supposed to be like sisters. And no one's talking to me. I don't know if, but I think that's what happens when people are healing. You retreat. And even Virginia said it in one of her Instagram posts. You retreat because that's your place of solace. So I think after being public for so long and there's so much happening, and there was a lot of backlash too, I think everyone tried to just go their separate ways, because even when you speak to quote, a sister survivor, you are re-traumatized because you cannot help but to, right. So I think that that's what Juliet perhaps didn't understand, why maybe Virginia was not responsive, why Maria was not responsive. But I think we will be hearing from the women who did step forward alongside Virginia. They will, I'm sure that they will not be silent in this moment when we're all standing forward to pay tribute to this wonderful woman.
Yeah, I've spoke to Juliet several times. I'll reach out to her after this as well. She's got an amazing story. And yeah, I think all the survivors need to be checked on at this moment in time, because sadly, and this has happened, there's parallels in many of the survivor communities, that in the beginning, everyone has been cohesive, but then over time, a lot of people, perhaps reliving the trauma has caused it, I don't know. A lot of the people have either gone their own ways or fallen out with each other.
Yeah, and everyone needs, it is the biggest sort of case of our lifetime. Add to it the fact that, J.E. and Ghislaine were spies. Add to it that it was a government sanctioned operation. Add this to the fact that it was, human transportation and all kinds of other things that we do not know. There are many layers to this. It wasn't just the superficial layer that the media focused on, which was the most spectacular, meaning the SA stuff and the transportation, but there were other layers that the public is not savvy to. But we know that this was an espionage operation. And with that, there's a lot extra stuff. And I think people, the women who stepped forward, needed time to heal after being outed to the public in the way they were, when, let's say, operatives of the state, quite frankly, as David Boies and J. Stanley Pottinger proved themselves to finally be operatives of the state who stepped in for a controlled opposition and only went after Prince Andrew. Now, I have my own suspicions as to why that happened, and I have been writing an article about that. That will be delayed because of this shock. I'm going to need to absorb what just happened with Virginia. But I believe there are other forces at play here. I don't think we've seen the end of this story. I do not feel that Donald Trump is going to issue any statement about Virginia. Remember when he was asked about Ghislaine, his words were, "I wish her well." However, do you think that he's going to say anything about Virginia? I doubt it. Shaun, do you think Donald Trump? Yeah.
I doubt it. It's the pressure on the regime to put out the list and all that kind of stuff, and we've seen that they're not being forthcoming with anything. It's just all been publicity stunts. So, it would dishonor Virginia's death unless he was able to be forthcoming with the goods, it would be dishonorable to Virginia's death.
Yes, they're not going to come. It's a state-sponsored operation. He is the president of the United States. He was Jeffrey's best friend for 15 years. People seem to gloss over that and forget this. She was procured on his property. He is not going to say anything. Those documents, we already had those documents. There was nothing new under the sun. They were giving to these documents A group of people went to Washington. It was mommy bloggers, people of no significance, no real media, mommy bloggers, people who had already done hit pieces on Virginia. The whole thing was a sham, meant to the people who are, let's say, live in a society that is unaware. The people who do read mainstream, oh, they believed something did happen. Those of us who know better realize that it was smoke and mirrors. And Virginia called him out. Nothing will happen. However, it's up to us, Matthew, Shaun, Beverly. It's up to us to keep this alive. This is not forget that the most powerful men in the world were aware of who Epstein was. Let's not fool ourselves. People are aware. They knew these women, and there were some boys who are now men who have never been mentioned, that these were trapped persons and trapped into this situation. It's a government sponsored. It was sponsored by the United States government in collaboration with the United Kingdom, in collaboration with the state of Israel. These are the three countries that knew about this operation. Every government has an operation of this type.
But may I just interject to say, in the UK, the Metropolitan Police still have a lot to answer for because, of course, Dame Cressida Dick, who was chief of the Metropolitan Police, was not only educated at school with Ghislaine Maxwell, but her father what happened to be Ghislaine's tutor at Oxford. So, I did lots of stories with Channel 4 and people like that on things about the connection of the Metropolitan Police and why have the Metropolitan Police never dealt with the matter of what went on in London, because there were plenty of activities that went on in London, both at the Kensington, the Stanhope Mews East Mews House, which was occupied by Ghislaine until 1997, and then subsequently the Kinnerton Street Mews House. I've been involved with the Daily Mail on the story of the bathtub. We proved the bathtub was full size. The Metropolitan Police, the chief of the Metropolitan Police went to school with the dreaded Ghislaine. So we've got a whole web here, and I think the whole thing comes back to something called a LAHOGUE. Here's my little diagram of that. The trust in Jersey, and that's how the money of the poor pensioners was stolen. And that's another part of the story. Ghislaine goes to New York and she's got no money, and then suddenly she's living in a $10 million house. I speak often with the dog walker who lived in the house. He experienced strange things. I speak often with the English victim of Ghislaine, which was convicted of abusing, who was a friend of mine prior to even my knowing about any of this. She doesn't want her name dragged through all of this, and I don't know where she is, but I'm going to send her a message today and see how she's doing, because she has a different life in America now. And, all of these people deserve to have peace. And I think the thing about Virginia Roberts is that if she hadn't been so trolled in the way of the Caroline Flack manner, maybe she could have retreated to this farm and had a good life. The carer's name, by the way, was called Cheryl Cicella. That was her name. She drove a Toyota Highlander. That's all I can tell you about her. I don't know anything beyond that. She was 71, I believe. But her name is Cheryl Cicella. I don't know what her connection was, but I think that this farm was obviously a place that she was trying to seek peace. And then, the peaceful part was interrupted with all of this accident and all the fallout of all these posts and all the rest of it. And it's very, very sad. It's just a terrible situation. And may the poor lady rest in peace.
Well,
Matthew, I think that I remember when you were so... You came out and you made that great discovery that Ghislaine was running a PROSTI blah 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 ring from the house, and you
Yeah,
just made the discovery.
That was my former secretary who lived in the building opposite. Her home was used for 2 weeks to monitor a house where upmarket ladies of a certain type would be visited all the time, and she never found out why her house was being used until obviously this incident occurred. So
Yeah,
the
it was
Metropolitan
great.
Police never updated her at the time. So this was prior to 1997. So prior to 1997, they were already watching her. But because of her involvement with Prince Andrew, obviously they probably said, "Oh, close down the operation." That was probably what actually happened. They've never explained that, but I never named the building or the street where the watching was going on. Well, and the building is a specific building which they used to monitor. When Channel 4 came to see me, they knew the building as well. So obviously they'd done their own digging, but they realized that I actually knew more about it than anybody else. So they came to see me. So yes, I think it was wider known that what was going on prior to 1997, prior to the Kinnerton Street house, there was something going on there. And why was that never properly investigated by the Metropolitan Police? Shame on them.
Well, I will tell you why, Matthew.
Hmm.
We all know about Jimmy Savile, who was only labeled a PDF file after his I'm going to just say unalivement of natural causes, because it was normal. He lived a very long life, and during the course of his life, people did try to step forward to no avail. And we can then look at the J.E. situation when he was forcibly unalived. So I think that what happens is, because, again, so Savile, I believe, worked for the Crown. I think we have enough evidence to say that he worked for the Crown. He was certainly protected by the Crown. We can see that Epstein was, as per Alexander Acosta's words, I was told to back off, that he belonged to intelligence. And so we are given these figures. Savile, after he has expired, J.E. after he too has expired, and we are giving these persons to vent our anger at. We do not place our anger where it belongs, with our leaders who conduct these operations and use people like Virginia and the others, and let people like Ghislaine, who they knew had an operation going on in her home, just like Savile, just like, what happened at the properties, different properties that J.E. owned, let's say in the private island, the Manhattan townhouse, the house in Florida. Everyone knew the place in Santa Fe. He even had a place in Colorado, and things were going on there. His apartment in Paris. People knew everywhere. This was silenced by what Alexander said. I was told to back off. And then we, the public, are given these people who go through a revolving door, because this is still happening, except it's no longer Savile running it, it's no longer J.E. running it, it's no longer Ghislaine running it, or even Jean-Luc, who's also expired. Other people have taken their place. This is a part of our reality. We know it now, thanks in large part to Virginia, Robert Giuffre, Maria Farmer, and everyone else who stepped forward. We know this now. However, we cannot say, oh, why have not the police? We now know why the police do not do anything. We now know why mainstream media, which is an arm, the police are an arm of the intelligence apparatus. In fact, they are taught by each country's intelligence apparatus on how to behave and what to do. We can no longer blame necessarily mainstream media, because they too are an arm of the intelligence apparatus. That is, we've gotten nothing but propaganda until we started having our own channels on YouTube, with Shaun having one of the longest standing channels talking truth to power. It's up to us, Matthew, Beverly, and Shaun, to keep telling the world the truth, because we cannot expect the truth to come from elsewhere. We cannot just focus on Savile or Epstein or Maxwell or this person, or we have to know where the power comes from. I personally believe that all politicians should be required, sort of like the way that we have, everyone has to do, you have to appear in court to be sort of like, I forget what it's called, on a every 4-year basis, you're like a jury selection.